to Sahara TV. I'm Adiola Fayem, and right now we want to talk on a highlight segment about the recently concluded U.S. presidential election, which put in Barack Obama back in office. With me to talk about this is Mr. Charles Riggs. He's a political commentator and election poll analyst. Charles, welcome to Sahara TV.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you here. Charles, now that the election is in, I mean, the results are in and Barack Obama is re-elected, do you think it's possible for Republicans to get back into the presidency if they keep ignoring the voice of the Latinos?
No, I do not. I think the election last Tuesday proved that Latinos will only grow and will only vote in greater and greater numbers in the coming years. I think their numbers were up to 10% in this election. They were around 8% in 2008, and I see no reason to believe that that won't increase with each presidential cycle. I think, I'm not sure of my exact numbers, but I believe by 2050 this country will be a minority Caucasian country.
By when?
By 2050 and possibly sooner. I'm not sure of that year. The point is that the increasing presence of Latinos as an important percentage of our electorate is inevitable. And unless Republicans get themselves right with Latinos, they are destined to go the way of the Whigs.
But how do they get themselves right with Latinos? What is it that they are not seeing, you know, when it comes to the population of Latinos in this country?
I think it's not as much what they're not seeing with regards to Latinos as what they are seeing with regards to their own base. Their own base is primarily older, whiter voters. And the more conservative, yes, okay. And the older, whiter voters in the Republican base believe that their way of life, that their country is threatened by the fact that it's becoming browner and younger and more educated. And the Republican Party, instead of embracing these new forces, embracing these new demographics, are making common cause with those who are most scared and most frightened of these new demographics. It is a short-term strategy meant to garner support by eliciting fear and distrust. And it might be able to work in the short term, but in the long term it will not. And I think that short term ran out last Tuesday.
I mean, not just the Latinos. We see it in the women voters, young people. Do you think that the Republicans may have to change their stance in terms of women issues like abortion, contraceptives, I mean, before they can get women votes again?
Totally, yes. I think it's not just a question of nominating Condi Rice or where the Latinos are concerned, nominating Marco Rubio. I think it's not just the people, it is the policies. They have to walk away from, for example, from these personhood amendments. In Virginia, the Republicans attempted to pass an extraordinarily invasive reactionary measure that would force women to undergo transvaginal ultrasounds if they wish to have an abortion. In other words, women would be forced to undergo state rape, in effect, if they wanted to have an abortion. That's outrageous. In 1980, that was outrageous. In 2012, it's completely unacceptable. So the Republican Party has to walk away from that. Now, the irony is that about 20 to 30 years ago, we did see some moderate pro-choice Republicans. But the last one with a high profile, Olympia Snowe, announced a few months ago, she's leaving the Senate. And moderate Republicans are going the way of the dodo bird at the moment. And as long as there is no way for moderate Republicans to get back into the party is doomed as far as women are concerned. And if the party is doomed as far as women are concerned, the party is doomed, period.
And from this last election, we see that more women actually voted, so they need women. They have to be able to play into their tunes.
It was very impressive and surprising. The split in the population is about 50-50 between men and women. There's a slight preponderance of women, but it's less than a percentage point. But the turnout, as you point out, was 54% women, 46% men. Yeah. That's extraordinary. Yeah. And as long as women continue to vote in those high percentages, and as long as Republicans stick to their guns on this right-wing policies that are oriented towards the most reactionary, quasi-fundamentalist religious forces, fundamentalist Christian forces, they will continue to get whacked. They will continue to lose.
But do you see Republicans changing their stance, though? Do you think it's going to happen?
I believe it will happen. I think if you look at history in America, we've we've created for ourselves a system where two parties are almost inevitable. There's really no room for third parties. Historically, what happens is that third parties introduce issues that are ignored by the two major parties. And then one of the two major parties adopts those issues and thus reinvigorates their own power, their own influence. And the third party dies. Former Governor Lamb of Colorado once pointed out that the third party's function is to sting like a bee and die. Because of the fact that our system is weighted towards a two-party system, what is going to happen is that those forces which are unhappy with the Democratic Party will move into the Republican Party because it will be seen as weak and it will be seen as ripe for a takeover. In the early 60s, the Republican Party went through something very similar to this. They nominated a right-winger named Barry Goldwater, and they got their clock cleaned. Within 4 years, they had cleaned up their act and they got Richard Nixon, a moderate conservative, elected as president in 1968. The Democratic Party went through something rather similar. They nominated George McGovern, a very liberal presidential candidate in 1972. And then, 20 years later, they rejected the liberals. They nominated a moderate, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton won, and the Democratic Party is now doing better and has been doing better for the last 20 years than it did in that entire stretch of time between 72 and 92. Because we have a two-party system, and because there's really no room for a third party to grow and develop and replace one of the two major parties, as there was, for example, in the 19th century when the Republican Party replaced the Whig Party, because these days there's no room for that because of restrictive ballot access laws, etc., the pressure on the Republican Party to reform, change itself, fix itself, get itself right with these constituencies will be very strong.
Okay, so the exit poll shows that young voters actually, most of them voted for Barack Obama. Why is that?
Well, in case of young voters, I think it was a combination of narrowcasting certain issues like student loans, like being allowed to stay on your parents' health insurance until you're 26 years old. So that's the narrowcasting issues. I also think that there's a much broader social issues component to this. In Tuesday night's election, we saw results where gay marriage won their referenda in all 4 states. That's the first time that's ever happened. We also saw efforts to legalize marijuana
and
win
young
in a couple of states.
people are obviously attracted to that.
Totally, yes. And because they have a socially progressive outlook that directly addresses those kinds of issues, they were attracted to Barack Obama and the Democratic Party, which has now made common cause with those issues. I think this is also part and parcel of what we see in terms of the changing coalition of the Democratic Party. In the 30s and 40s, the backbone of the Democratic Party were blue-collar union workers in the Midwest. But what's happened in the last 5-10 years, and this process has been accelerated by the emergence of Barack Obama, we've seen college-educated youths, people of color, also gravitating to the Democratic Party. I'm not just talking about African Americans. I'm talking about Latinos. I'm talking about Asians. I'm talking about all people of color. As that has happened, the Democratic Party has felt freer to move forward on social issues. 20 to 30 years ago, a lot of Democrats were very nervous about the abortion issue. There were a lot of Democrats who were pro-life. You can search in vain for a major pro-life figure in the Democratic Party today. The only one I can think of off the top of my head is Senator Casey in Pennsylvania, and he's the exception, not the rule. That is the reason, I think, why young people are now gravitating to the Democratic Party so strongly, because of the social issues component.
And for Republicans to be back in office, back in power, they need the voice of the young people, so they can't keep ignoring what the young people want.
Totally. And I think in that regard, they do have a way out, but they're sort of ignoring it. I know of a lot of young people myself who do not consider themselves liberals, particularly on economic issues, and who are not happy with President Obama, but who voted for him, but who really approve of the libertarian philosophy, which is a philosophy which states, if a woman wishes to have an abortion, she may. If a man wishes to marry another man, he may. This is the libertarian philosophy. Now, a lot of these people are very conservative economically. They do not believe in using government as a means of stimulating the economy. By the way, I do. I do not consider myself a libertarian. I'm just saying that the libertarian philosophy is one which young people find attractive. And the Republican Party has a tiny libertarian contingent. It's represented by leaders which have not received much credibility or visibility, like Ron Paul, like Gary Johnson, and so on. But I believe that's one of the ways in which the Republican Party might be able to make inroads in the future. I note, for example, that one of the disappointing aspects of President Obama's tenure has been the fact that he has not chosen to close Guantanamo. He has not chosen to discontinue rendition. He continues to believe that he has the right on foreign territory to include Americans who have made common cause with al-Qaeda as terrorists, as anti-combatants. There have been drone strikes directed at American citizens overseas. Now, some of us may not have much of a problem with that. I'm ambivalent on that question myself. But the point is that that was a low-hanging fruit that the Republicans could have grabbed this year, instead of which they went down the Liz Cheney, neocon, Josh Bolton route, which was a very authoritarian, very unconstitutional, or rather anti-constitutional approach when it came to civil liberties and fighting the war on terror. In my mind, that was one of the big mistakes the Republican Party made. Barack Obama left the Republican Party this huge opening by failing to address that particular issue, and the Republicans just totally missed it.
So now that the Democrats won, do you think that that's now a mandate for them to pursue some of the goals, like increasing taxes of the rich people? Do you think that the result of this election now becomes a mandate for Obama and Democrats to go after all the things that they said they will do during the campaign?
Totally. And I think if you look at the results of the election, that bears out that conclusion. A lot of people some people might look at the popular vote and say, hey, look, President Obama, he won by 2 percentage points. What's that? That's hardly a mandate. But I think they neglect to note that the election became nationalized in a manner that I don't think I've seen in my lifetime. It was a slim margin of 2 percentage points or so, but that slim margin obtained across the country. It obtained in the western states of Nevada and Colorado. It obtained in the midwestern states of Ohio and Wisconsin. It obtained in the southern states of Virginia and Florida. This indicates that while the margin was slim, it was widespread. In addition, you saw a situation where in the Senate, the Democrats not only held the Senate, but they actually increased their number by 2 seats. Even more impressive was the fact that a lot of the women who won Senate seats in the election last Tuesday are quite liberal. Tammy Baldwin, for example, is not a member of the Bill Clinton centrist contingent in the Democratic Party at all. She is a card-carrying, Democrat from the Democratic wing, Howard Dean-style Democrat. And this is the mandate that the Democratic Party was given. And I frankly am very grateful to President Obama for not soft-pedaling the issue of taxes, for not soft-pedaling the issue of whether or not the rich should be made to pay their fair share. I think by adopting that clearly populist tone and making sure that if he won, and if Democrats won, it would clearly be perceived as a victory for populist thinking. By doing that, he ensured that this mandate has meaning, real meaning. Now, I know a lot of Republicans are in denial, but they're just going to have to get over it.
I mean, obviously, a lot of these voters, like the Hispanics, they have expectations of President Barack Obama, which was why they voted for him. Like yesterday, there were protests in front of the White House, that he has to follow through with the things that he promised them. So, first of all, do you think that this president can deliver? But let me ask, first of all, what are some things that these people are expecting Obama to do? And do you think that he can deliver?
First, the expectations. They are expecting immigration reform.
Immigration reform.
And I think to the president's credit, he's expecting immigration reform too. If you took a look at the interview he gave to the Des Moines Register a few months ago, it was at first off the record, and then the Obama campaign changed their minds because they felt that President Obama had been very articulate, very effective in the interviews, so they decided, contrary to standard practice, to make it public. And that was one of the goals that the president mentioned as on the top of his priority list. So I think he wants it to happen. He has expectations that it will happen.
Okay.
Whether it will happen or not, I think depends a lot on John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi.
Okay.
At the moment, you have a situation where John Boehner has demonstrated clearly that he's not able to hold his own caucus. He's not able to lead his own caucus. If I had a dime for every time he said in 2011 and 2012, I can get this passed, I can get that passed, I have the votes, I have the votes, follow me. Yes. He runs to the top of the hill, he turns around, his followers aren't there, and he says, oops, sorry, ain't got the votes.
Can I go back?
John Boehner has been a terrible leader, an awful leader. Now, there is a way out for John Boehner. Whether he has the imagination and the smarts to go with that, I don't know, yes. But the way out is, frankly, to go to some moderate conservative Democrats and say, I can't get my Tea Party loonies to do this. Will you help me out?
You help me.
And part and parcel of that, frankly, is he needs to go to Nancy Pelosi, hat in hand,
Yeah.
and say, can you help me?
Yeah, just be humble.
Yes, exactly.
So, but do you think that Obama can deliver because a lot of people are describing him as weak or he cried, whatever. But do you think that he could deliver?
Well, as far as the crying is concerned, and as far as his being weak is concerned, I think he's shown emotion in public exactly twice since 2006, to the best of my ability to recall. The day before the election, when his grandmother died, he gave a speech, and he had one tear.
Oh.
And that was it. And the other time, of course, was the other day when he went to the Chicago headquarters and he thanked his supporters. Other than that, he's not a very emotional person.
He's just human.
Yeah, exactly. He's not a very emotional person. And I think, as far as being a weak president is concerned, I think any person who manages to win election not once but twice, in a country which once was very racist, and in fact was once socially very conservative, is an extraordinary achievement. And I also think it's an extraordinary achievement that a president who is supposedly weak was able to oust Gaddafi without one single drop of American blood being spilled. Any president who was able to get a national coalition to enforce a no-fly zone in the Middle East, in that rat's nest, to get consensus, and to get Gaddafi out with the relative efficiency and speed with which we did, cannot be characterized fairly as a weak president.
And I see that you're very happy with this election. Seems like your candidate won. Is that true?
I am totally thrilled. And this is not only because my presidential candidate won. It's not only because my candidates won for Senate. It's also because I've been waiting all my life. I'm 58 years old. I've been waiting all my life for the return of a progressive coalition of the sort that FDR built in the 30s. And throughout the 90s and aughts, the Democratic Party struggled with this inside straight electoral college strategy. Basically, they had an 18-state strategy. It was centered on Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania. And that was it. And if you couldn't carry those 3 states, you were dead. You couldn't win the presidency. President Obama has now expanded that coalition. He can now win in Colorado, he can now win in Virginia, he can now win in Florida. This is the progressive Democratic Party coalition of the future. It has it has 2 strong wings now, a Rust Belt wing and a Sun Belt wing. And I think we have the makings of a progressive coalition that will endure for decades, just as FDR's coalition endured for decades. And that is why, in a way, I think this election may have been historically more important than the 2008 election.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Charles, for coming to the studio today. I so much enjoy everything that